I was halfway down the empty highway, headlights barely piercing the dense fog, when I first felt the wrongness of it, the way it clung to the road and swallowed every sound. After 6 months in the old watchtower, I knew morning mists like old friends. Soft sheets drifting through pines, chilly but harmless. This fog was different, almost oily, and it triggered the same unease I got waking before dawn, like the world was waiting for something evil. I flicked off the radio when its static turned shrill. The silence that followed only amplified my racing thoughts. At 42, I should have been in the prime of my career, a chemical engineer once celebrated for innovation. Instead, one meltdown at the board meeting, one tirade against management's shady shortcuts, and I found myself walking out, tail between my legs. Maybe they were right. I'd wasted my potential. Or maybe it was just easier to run away than fight. For half a year, I hid in that watchtower deep in the state park, telling myself I was finding purpose, when all I'd done was nurse my wounded pride. Now I was coming back to Millbrook, hoping to make amends with my wife, Linda, and my teenage sons, Joey and Marcus. But as the exit sign for my hometown loomed through the gloom, an icy dread formed in my gut. The streets were deserted, devoid of the early joggers and paper delivery vans I remembered. Each block deeper into the neighborhood felt more surreal, lost in a haze of ghostly gray. I turned onto my street, and my pulse jumped. No lights glowed in the windows, no cars rumbled by. There was nothing but silent houses drowned in fog. Even the stray cats that used to knock over trash bins were missing. It was like the hush from my watchtower had followed me home, thick and suffocating. Pulling into my driveway, I half expected Linda's car to be parked there, maybe a soft glow from the kitchen window. But the driveway was empty, the porch light off. Stepping out, I nearly slipped on the walkway, heart thudding at how unnaturally quiet it was. The front door was locked. My key still fit, but opening it felt like intruding into a stranger's house. Inside, the place looked frozen in time. Stale air, a stack of unwashed dishes, a sticky note on the fridge, groceries, library, pick up kids from practice. Written in Linda's neat handwriting but clearly days old. Where were they? My calls to Linda's phone went nowhere. Same for Joey's and Marcus's. My own voice echoed through empty rooms as I called their names. Not a whisper in return. And then, I saw something that made my skin crawl. A strange black residue clinging to the inside of the upstairs window frame. It looked almost like soot or mold. What the hell? My mind flicked back to the watchtower job, looking out at the forest, noticing how mold thrives in damp corners. Is the house really that humid? But the residue felt oily on my fingertips, and it glistened as though alive. Then, a sudden noise outside, the crunch of footsteps on gravel. Relief flooded me. Maybe Linda or the boys had just pulled in. I ran downstairs and stepped onto the porch. The fog was thicker now, swirling in pale curtains. At first, I saw no one, but then a figure emerged. Mr. Hannigan, my next-door neighbor. He was tall, mid-60s, typically all smiles and chat about fishing. But now his eyes were sunken, face tight with anger. He stopped in front of my yard, glaring at me through the haze. "You came back," he said, voice dripping with contempt. "Decided you were bored in your little tower." I blinked. Yeah, I just got back." "Is everything okay? Does it look okay?" He spat, gesturing at the fog. Some of us didn't have the luxury of hiding in the woods. We had to stay and watch everything fall apart. Alarm bells went off in my head. "What do you mean fall apart?" He pointed a trembling finger. "You're the big shot, aren't you? So smart, so gifted, and you wasted it all. Could have saved us, but instead you just left." I took a step back. The hostility in his voice rattled me. "Mr. Hannigan, I don't know what you're talking about." "You never do," he sneered, then turned on his heel and vanished down the street, merging into the fog. His words hit me like a punch. The bitterness, the accusation, it was all so confusing. What the hell is going on? I glanced around. A few other silhouettes drifted on the periphery of my vision, neighbors, perhaps. but they kept their distance. I decided to check the rest of my house for clues. It was so unnervingly silent inside. I remembered how Linda often used to hum while cleaning up, or how the boys would banter loudly over video games. Now, there was only quiet. I found more oily residue on window frames and door jambs. My mind raced for an explanation, some leak from outside. Maybe a new pesticide, a side effect of the rigs drilling offshore. I'd heard rumors that the drilling had gone deeper, that they'd discovered unusual pockets of material under the ocean floor. The local news had questioned the safety. Could that be connected to the fog? I moved to the bedroom, rummaging for Linda's phone charger or the kids' backpacks. But I found nothing. Instead, my reflection in the mirror startled me. I looked gaunt, older, streaks of gray at my temples that hadn't been so pronounced last time I was here. The lines around my eyes told a story of months spent wrestling regrets. I swallowed, remembering the lecture from my ex-supervisor. "Tom, you are wasted potential, such wasted potential." The phrase haunted me. I was always on the brink of something big, always capable of greatness. Then I'd fail to follow through. The meltdown at the factory. The retreat to the watchtower. Outside, the sky rumbled, a distant noise that sounded more like an industrial groan than thunder. The ominous timbre made my hair stand on end. I need to find Linda and the boys. Setting aside my own guilt, I grabbed my jacket, hopped back into the car, and decided to go check the high school. Maybe the kids had early practice. Or maybe Linda had taken them somewhere. Anything's better than this suffocating emptiness. It was around 7 a.m. when I reached the school parking lot. Normally a bustle of morning activity buses, teachers arriving, the place was deserted. No sign of sports practice. The fog curled around the chain-link fence, giving the impression of a drowned world. I left the car running, half expecting to see a security guard wave me away. But no one did. Inside, the corridors echoed with my footsteps. I passed rows of lockers, some left open. An abandoned sneaker lay in the hall, as though dropped mid-stride. Fluorescent lights flickered, and a sick feeling churned in my gut. Where did everyone go? I tried the front office, but it was locked. Peering through the window, I saw no movement, just scattered papers. Then I noticed a shape behind me. I whirled to see Miss Carter, the assistant principal, standing in the hallway. She wore her usual crisp blouse, but her hair was messy, eyes wide and rimmed with red. She had a phone in her hand, though it dangled like she barely remembered holding it. "Miss Carter," I started, relieved to see a familiar face. "Have you seen my wife, Linda, or my sons? Are they here?" She stared at me for a long moment, unblinking. Then her lips twitched into a tight smile that looked more like a grimace. "Thomas Reynolds, you finally came back." I stiffened. There was that accusatory tone again. "Yeah, I did. Do you know what happened? Where everyone is?" She let out a soft, humorless laugh. "They probably vanished or changed. The fog does something strange. Gets in people's heads. We called an emergency staff meeting last night. Students started complaining of nightmares, headaches. Parents, like your wife, kept them home or tried to. But the more the fog spread, the stranger people acted. Some got downright vicious. And as for you," she narrowed her eyes. "You were nowhere to be found. That's not fair," I snapped. But doubt gnawed at me. Maybe it was fair. After all, I ran away once. Maybe they all resented me. "Is it not fair?" she echoed bitterly, stepping closer. "You had so much potential, Thomas. So many brilliant ideas about environmental safety, about chemical hazards. If you'd stayed, if you'd fought for real reforms, maybe the drilling would have stopped." She pressed her phone into my chest, her voice trembling. "But you left." My lungs felt tight. I never asked for that responsibility. Guilt and anger churned. "Look, I'm sorry. Right now, I just need to know where Linda and the boys are." She tilted her head as if listening to something behind the walls. Then she whispered, "Your older boy, Joey. He was in the cafeteria earlier. They were distributing these gas masks. said it was some half-baked attempt to block the fog's effects. Linda was with him. Then more people started changing. She shuddered. I locked myself in the office. I think I heard them leave. Something about a safe zone. But I don't know if that was real or rumor. The phone lines are mostly dead. My cell can't hold a signal and we're cut off. I felt a rush of faint hope. At least they were together. Maybe they found help. Which way did they go? She pointed down the hall. West exit. The one leading toward downtown. But that was hours ago. Then her gaze turned distant. Do you hear it? Do I hear what? She reached toward me, fingertips trembling. The voice in the fog. It's telling me terrible things. My regrets and my mistakes. I see them all at once, swirling in the haze. No matter what I do, I can't stop hearing it. Goosebumps rose on my arms. I don't hear anything. She laughed, a raw, broken sound. You will. It knows you, Thomas. Then her phone clattered to the floor and she walked away, disappearing around a corner. I called after her, but no answer. My hands shook. This was beyond normal. The voice in the fog, she said, it reminds people of their regrets. Is that why everyone keeps digging into my so-called wasted potential? Are they hearing my own self-loathing? The overhead lights flickered again. A surge of dread told me to leave. As I headed for the west exit, I caught glimpses of something slithering across the floor in a side corridor, something pale and fluid in the gloom. I froze hard in my throat. It vanished before I could fully see it, but my mind conjured images of a half-solid wisp. Just the fog or something else. I ran to my car and drove off, the old tires squealing on damp pavement. The radio crackled to life with an emergency tone. Emergency alert. All residents stay indoors. Do not breathe the fog if possible. Avoid strangers or acting aggressively. Repeat, stay in. Then it collapsed into static. An hour later, I found myself driving aimlessly through deserted streets, searching for Linda's red hatchback or any sign of my boys. The further downtown I got, the thicker the fog became, as if a nexus of corruption lay closer to the shoreline. Buildings loomed in silhouettes, windows dark. Doors left ajar. Occasionally I saw movement, people stumbling around, their eyes glassy or glaring from behind corners. I kept the doors locked. I stopped at a pharmacy, hoping to find a working landline. The place was ransacked, shelves overturned, medication scattered. In the back, a TV mounted to the ceiling played that same emergency alert on loop. A dead phone line buzzed behind the counter. I felt trapped in a nightmare, my breath echoing unnaturally in the gas mask I'd found. Someone had left it in the store's first aid aisle. Though it offered little comfort, at least it filtered some air. But the heaviness in my chest didn't let up. Something told me to check the bay. After all, my old friend Neil used to say, if trouble's brewing in Millbrook, always look to the water. Half the town's economy relied on fishing or shipping, and in recent years, the big business was the oil rigs. So I drove toward the waterfront. Fog pressed against the windshield. The few times I glimpsed people, they glared at me, snarling under their breath. They muttered about me, abandoning them, about my selfishness, about my failure. It was as if the entire town had become a manifestation of my deepest self-doubt. Every step I took, I heard the echoes. Coward, failure, you left us, wasted potential. On the coastal road, I passed a partial barricade. A sign read, Hazard Zone, Fog Quarantine. My heart hammered. Past it, the bay emerged, though mostly hidden by swirling mist. Through the gloom, I saw flickers of something huge out on the water. Maybe it was the lights from the rig. Black columns of equipment rose like a skeleton on the horizon. As I parked, the stench hit me, a fishy chemical tang that clung to everything. My eyes watered behind the gas mask. Sloshing footsteps sounded behind me. I whirled, crowbar in hand. I'd grabbed it from my garage earlier, ready for an attack. But it was just a single figure, a man in his late 40s, wearing a filthy, reflective vest. His eyes were wild. He coughed, voice rasping through cracked lips. Are you Thomas Reynolds? I flinched. Did the whole town know I was back? Yes, who are you? He advanced a step, and I noticed black goo along his sleeves, shining like oil. You don't remember me, he said in a strangled laugh. I was at the factory's last safety meeting, months ago. You argued with management. You told them they were ignoring the real hazards. My mind flicked through faces. I remembered him faintly, an operator or technician. Look, I'm sorry about everything that happened. The meltdown, he shook his head, eyes burning with bitterness. You were right after all. We were ignoring hazards. The drilling, they found something under the seabed. Something old, some black deposit that wasn't just oil. He shuddered, the black goo on his arms pulsing. They kept going anyway. They awakened it, Reynolds. And you were the only one who tried to stop them. Then you ran. I swallowed, dread coalescing. What did they awaken? He exhaled a shaky breath, staring at the bay as if it might swallow him. Some kind of entity or presence. It's in the fog. It crawls into people's minds, unearthing every dark thought, every insecurity. Makes them hateful or docile or insane. Some vanish into the water. Some become something else. He showed me his arm again, the black patches crawling like fungus. It changes us, connects us. The entire town is infected, and soon it'll spread further. My blood ran cold. How do we stop it? He let out a cracked laugh. Stop it? Maybe we can't. Unless, he wiped his mouth, leaving a smear of black. Unless someone can figure out the chemical approach. The rigs had a side project, some kind of neutralizing compound. They wanted to handle any exotic bacteria. They built the formula at the old factory labs, but never finished. But maybe you can finish it. You're the big engineer, right? My heart pounded with renewed terror and a flicker of purpose. I had ideas. Ways to break down microbial cell walls with specialized reagents. But that was just theoretical. He grabbed my shoulders, eyes wild. At least give it a try. For God's sake, try. Then he sagged, and to my horror, black ooze trickled from the corner of his mouth. He collapsed, choking. I leapt back as the stench grew unbearable. When I mustered the courage to step closer, I couldn't believe it. He was no longer breathing. Just like that, my old colleague was dead, eyes wide. His face twisted in a final expression of anguish. I fled that stretch of coastline, my mind aflame with the man's words. A chemical approach, the old factory labs. But that was the same place where my meltdown had happened. The place I'd run from. Did I really have the strength to go back? The entire concept terrified me, and yet, if there was a chance it could help Linda and my boys, I had no choice. Still no sign of them. The heartbreak gnawed at me. Were they infected? Had they turned on each other? No, I told myself. They were strong. They must still be holding out. As I drove through side streets, I passed more neighbors, each locked in their own torment. Mrs. Collins, the sweet old lady from 3 houses down, was crouched on her lawn, ripping out clumps of grass while muttering, "Gone, all gone." A teenage boy I didn't recognize roamed barefoot, scratching at his face. The gloom seemed to intensify their mania. Or maybe the mania fed the gloom. And the illusions, oh God, the illusions were starting to plague me too. I caught glimpses in the rearview mirror of towering, pale shapes in the distance. When I turned around, they vanished. My skin crawled with the sense that something watched me from the corners of my eyes. Every negative thought I'd ever had seemed amplified, swirling in my skull. You're a failure. You should have stayed to fix the rig situation. Now, the entire town is paying the price. I pressed the gas, desperate to outrun my own mind. The factory loomed on the horizon. Evergreen Chemicals, a sprawling industrial complex near the water's edge. Security gates were open, deserted. I drove in slowly, scanning for movement. Massive steel pipes rose from the facility, twisting among brick buildings. Flickering fluorescent lights gave everything a sickly glow in the lingering fog. The smell of chemicals mingled with the salty stench of the bay. Just find the lab, I told myself. Find the formula, see if you can finish it. Maybe that will kill the entity in the fog. The rational side of me, the old chemical engineer, insisted that some kind of high-intensity reagent or catalytic agent might break down the spore-like structures. If the fog was truly a living organism tied to an ancient being, maybe I could destroy it at its core. An insane plan, but it was all I had. I parked near Building D, where advanced R&D labs had been. The main doors were ajar, glass shattered. Cautiously, I entered. The hall reeked of ammonia and something coppery. My footsteps echoed as strange shadows flickered behind broken windows. I found the lab easily enough, Lab D2, labeled with prototype synthesis. Inside, the damage was extensive. Scattered beakers, burnt trays, and overturned desks. But a line of metal cabinets stood intact, labeled special reagents. If I'm lucky, the notes or partial formulas were still inside. I moved to the largest cabinet. Locked. I rummaged for a crowbar or a heavy tool, found a steel pipe in the corner. But the lock snapped open more easily than I expected, as if it had been tampered with before. Inside, vials, containers, partial research logs. My eyes scanned the labels. T7 catalyst, chlorine strain, some scribbled notes. Spore disintegration tests positive at 40% concentration. My pulse quickened as I realized that this was it. The partial solution they'd developed for exotic drilling bacteria. Footsteps sounded behind me. I spun, brandishing the pipe. A figure stepped into the flickering overhead light. Preston Ward, my ex-colleague, and once a close friend. We'd studied together in college, been hired at the same time, then drifted apart after my meltdown. He was sweaty, hair plastered to his forehead, wearing a torn lab coat. "Tom," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Thank God I saw your car." "It's chaos out there," I swallowed, saying, "Preston, you're not infected." His eyes flickered with anxiety. "Not fully, I guess. I have the same nightmares, the whispers. But I've managed to keep it at bay. Maybe because I'm still on the meds for anxiety." He gave a humorless laugh. Who knew it had come in handy? I lowered the pipe, still wary. "You know anything about this T7 catalyst or the spore?" "The rigs awakened something," he grimaced. "Yeah, the top brass wanted me to hush it up. But I was working with them, trying to refine a formula to break down the spore's cell walls. We made progress. Look." He grabbed a binder from a fallen shelf, flipping pages. We tested on small samples. The spore shriveled, lost its ability to replicate. But we never got a chance to scale it up for the rig. Management said we had to meet deadlines first. Then the incident happened. Workers started disappearing, sparking rumors of living shapes in the drilling fluid. A cold dread settled in my stomach. "So you think if we make a large enough batch and release it near the source, we can kill the entity?" He nodded, then hesitated. "But we'll need specialized equipment. The big mixers in the next building could handle it. They're still operational if the backup generators work. Then we'd have to figure out how to deliver it to the water." I glanced at the black windows. "I'll do whatever it takes." Preston managed a tight smile, but then he eyed me carefully. "Tom, I'm sorry about before. How I didn't back you in that meeting. I guess I was too afraid of losing my job. Bitterness welled. I can't blame you. I ran away. Everyone's always telling me I wasted my potential." He put a hand on my shoulder. "Maybe this is our chance to fix it." A surge of fragile hope ran through me. "Yes, let's fix it. Let me save my family." Just then, the overhead lights flickered heavily. A low moan reverberated through the building, as if the walls were breathing. My heart skipped as wet scraping sounds came from the corridor, like claws on the tiled floor. We froze, then Preston whispered, "They're here too." My mind flashed to the rumor of five-legged creatures that manifested from the entity's presence. The flickering lamp revealed a shape in the hallway, pale, with too many joints crawling on elongated limbs. This was no ordinary infestation. This was something born of that ancient spore. I grabbed the T7 vials, stuffing them into my bag. "We can't fight that. Let's get to the next building." We slipped into a side door, creeping along. The corridor echoed with a low static hum that made my teeth ache. I felt my mind swirl with negative thoughts, as if the creature's presence amplified every insecurity. You're going to fail. You're going to watch your family die because you're incompetent. I clenched my eyes shut, forcing the thoughts away. I heard footsteps and then a scuttling behind us. We ducked into a stairwell, hearing the wet hiss of something passing by. Shadows danced under the door crack. My stomach threatened to revolt. If these things swarm the building, we're trapped. After a minute, silence returned. We cautiously made our way upstairs, across a walkway, and down another flight to Building F, where the large mixers were. The air was suffocating, the overhead lights dimming. My pulse pounded in my ears. At last, we found a steel door labeled Industrial Synthesis. I was about to pry it open when the door abruptly clicked. It swung inward, revealing a tall figure. My heart lurched, crowbar raised. "Relax," the figure said, stepping into the light. It was Vincent, another ex-colleague. A broad-shouldered guy who used to help with mechanical maintenance. He wore a battered uniform, face streaked with grime. I was securing this area. "The mixers are here," he beckoned us inside. The interior was a large industrial bay with catwalks, huge steel vats. The hum of backup generators sounded below the walkway. My tension eased slightly. "You're not infected?" I asked. Vincent let out a harsh laugh. "Well, who isn't these days? The whispers get to me too. But I'm functioning well enough. We can't just roll over, can we?" Preston explained our plan. Combine T7 with certain chlorine compounds, mass-produce them, and then figure out distribution. Vincent nodded, although a haunted look flickered in his eyes. "We better move fast. Something big is happening out there. The sky's turning weird colors, and people keep changing." We hurried to a control console. The overhead lights blinked erratically. My attention kept drifting, my mind conjuring images of Linda and the boys, cornered or worse. I forced the thoughts aside. My hands trembled as we set out the reagents. Preston typed commands into the console to feed water, chlorine, and the T7 derivative into a central vat. The machine roared to life, stirring chemicals in a vortex. The clang of metal echoed in the gloom. While it mixed, a new wave of dread crept over me. The fog outside the windows darkened. A dull roar reverberated across the bay. My insecurities gnawed. "Even if this works, how will you get it to the rig? You'll fail like always." I felt nauseous, leaning against the railing for support. Preston placed a hand on my shoulder. "We're almost done." He tapped some keys, verifying temperatures. "We just need to hold out." But from the corner of the room, Vincent began muttering. I turned, noticing him trembling, staring at the swirling chemical in the vat. No, this is wrong," he hissed. "We can't kill it. It's older than us. It demands respect." Alarmed, Preston and I exchanged glances. "Vincent?" Preston asked carefully, "Are you okay?" Vincent whirled, eyes wide, veins bulging in his neck. "Do you hear it? The entity. It's in my head. It says you'll doom us if we kill it. We have to." He grabbed a wrench from the floor. "We have to stop you." Ice flooded my veins. "Vincent, don't do this," I pleaded. "We need you," he bellowed, swinging the wrench at the console. Sparks erupted as metal crunched the control panel. Alarms blared. The vat's agitation motor began sputtering. Preston rushed forward, trying to disarm him. They grappled. Vincent's face contorted with rage or panic, flailing the wrench. The console belched more sparks. I darted to the vat, checking if the mixture was stable. Alarms beeped wildly. Temperature rising. Pressure climbing. If it overheated, we'd lose the batch. We can't let it blow. My mind raced. I yanked a lever to bleed off steam. Meanwhile, I heard a scuffle behind me. Preston cried out, Vincent grunting. Then a sickening crack, forcing me to spun around. Vincent lay sprawled on the floor, unconscious or worse. Preston stood over him, panting, blood trickling from his forehead. He tried to bash my skull in, he said shakily. I had no choice. I swallowed hard, pressing a hand to Preston's shoulder. We have to finish the mixing cycle. The console flickered and the main controls were damaged, but the vat still churned. The chemical inside glowed a faint greenish hue. I grabbed a portable computer from a side desk, hooking it into the system's port. I can override, I told Preston. Just watch the door. He nodded, retrieving Vincent's wrench. The overhead lights continued to flash, painting the entire bay in strobing shadows. My code hammered at the system, forcing it to maintain the mixing sequence at the correct temperature. Adrenaline spiked. If I messed this up, we'd either get useless sludge or an explosion. At last, the readout chimed, solution complete. Relief warred with fear. We did it, I whispered. Now we just have to deliver it to the water. Preston, trembling, nodded. We can fill the tanker truck outside. Then drive it to the harbor. Then suddenly, a distant roar, something monstrous, echoed through the complex. The building shook. The overhead lights flickered once more, then died, replaced by the dim red glow of emergency lamps. The generator stuttered. We loaded drums of the solution onto a cart, planning to pump it into a tanker. Vincent remained unconscious. My conscience twitched. Should I leave him or at least help him? But time was short, and the entire building shuddered again, dust raining from rafters. Then I heard a voice, familiar but twisted by static. From the shadows emerged Joseph, my old partner and friend at the factory. He'd been close to me once, but parted ways after my meltdown. I froze at the sight of him. Something about his posture was wrong, too rigid, eyes too bright. Thomas, he greeted in a hollow tone. Preston, are you working late? Preston raised the wrench. Joseph, you're infected, aren't you? Joseph's lips curled. I'm not infected, I'm chosen. I've seen the truth. Our masters dwell beneath the seabed. I helped them rise, and now, you want to murder them with your vile chemical. That's not going to happen. My mind reeled, you helped them. You did this on purpose. He shrugged, why fight it? They show us our regrets and weaknesses, yes, but they also offer transcendence. Once we surrender, the voice in the fog becomes pure ecstasy. Rage and betrayal warred in my chest. My crowbar felt heavy in my hand. You're insane, I spat. I'm not letting you or anyone hurt my family. Joseph raised a pistol, cocking it with a slick grin. You already have, old friend. By letting this happen. But don't worry, you won't be alive to see the final dawn. My heart hammered. Preston, run. A shot rang out, deafening in the metal bay. I dove behind the cart as sparks flew off a steel beam. Preston ducked behind a generator, cursing. Joseph's footsteps echoed. Then an unearthly scream tore through the corridor, one of the creatures, drawn by the noise. Joseph whipped around, cursing. I seized the chance, charging him with the crowbar. He fired, the bullet whizzing past my ear. I rammed the metal bar into his wrist. The pistol clattered away. He lashed out with surprising strength, elbowing me in the ribs. We grappled, the floor slick with spilled reagent. Joseph snarled, eyes glinting with madness. You have no idea what you're meddling with, he hissed. This entity is unstoppable. I mustered every ounce of hatred for the regrets he'd forced me to relive, for the possibility he'd harmed Linda and my sons. With a roar, I slammed the crowbar against his temple. He crumpled unconscious. My chest heaved with adrenaline, heartbreak, relief. Preston emerged, wrench in hand, eyes wide. We could hear scraping in the corridor, snarls. The creatures were close. We have to go now, Preston urged. We locked Joseph behind a supply cage, ignoring the pang of guilt. His final glare was seared into my mind, like he was certain we'd fail. We wheeled the chemical drums outside, where the swirling fog was so thick the street lamps cast only faint halos. The stench of decay hung in the air. We found a half-loaded tanker truck near a loading dock, presumably used for shipping chemicals. By some miracle, the keys were inside. As we pumped the solution from the drums into the tanker's reservoir, a surge of hope cut through my dread. If we got this into the bay near the rig, maybe it would spread, dissolve the spore, weaken the entity. Maybe this nightmare would end. But as we worked, the building behind us groaned. Flickers of movement in the windows. The watchers were there, hostile eyes twisted by the fog. Some shouted curses at me, echoing old resentments. Others just stared with blank expressions. One man stepped forward as though to intervene. I brandished the crowbar, my voice shaking. "Stay back," I said. He hissed. "You can't kill it. You can't kill us," then retreated into the shadows. Once we finished loading the tanker, we took off, driving through the broken factory gates at breakneck speed. Preston's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The entire world seemed to tilt, as though reality itself was warping under the entity's thrall. Lightning lit the sky green, revealing glimpses of massive shapes writhing in the clouds. Or maybe that was just my imagination. The radio spat static as my head ached with a dull pulse. Every negative memory threatened to resurface. The board meeting meltdown, Linda's disappointed eyes when I packed my bags for the watchtower. "I'm doing this for you, for the kids," I reminded myself. We reached the harbor area near the industrial pier, one of the deeper docking points used for freight. We planned to pump the chemical directly into the water, letting currents carry it out. The wind whipped our hair as we parked, the ocean a churning black mass beyond. Through the fog, the rig's lights flickered eerily. We unspooled a heavy hose from the tanker, hooking it to the rear valve. Rain or sea spray pelted my face. The deck beneath us shuddered with each wave. Preston threw the main switch, and greenish fluid began gushing into the water, fizzing on contact. My heart soared. "It's working." Then I felt it, a presence behind me. I turned and my stomach dropped. Standing on the pier was Linda. My wife. Her hair was soaked, eyes wide with tears. She wore the same jacket I last saw her in months ago. My chest exploded with relief. "Linda," I cried, dropping the hose controls. "Oh God, you're alive." She stared, lips trembling, then rushed forward. I swept her into my arms, feeling her warmth, ignoring my saturated clothes. "Where are the boys?" I gasped. "Are they safe?" She pulled back, gaze darting. They're hiding. The older one, Joey, he's hurt. We were chased by these things. He's unconscious. I came here looking for help. Is this chemical? Are you fighting back?" I nodded, tears in my eyes. "Yes, we found a way. We can kill the spore, end this once and for all." She clutched me, sobbing. "I was so afraid you'd never come back. That we'd be lost forever." I stroked her hair, relief flooding me so powerfully I almost collapsed. "It's okay," I murmured. "I'm here now. I'm sorry for everything," but a flicker of disquiet tugged at my mind. She felt off somehow. Her hug was stiff, her eyes almost too intense. Then she whispered in my ear, "Let me see it." "Let you see what?" She pulled away slightly, looking at the tanker. "The chemical. Let me see what you're using to kill it." Preston had paused the pumping, also staring warily. Something about Linda's tone was strange, almost flat. My pulse quickened. "Linda, where exactly are the boys?" She forced a teary smile. "Close. We can get them after. Just show me the batch." She started walking toward the tanker's main valve. I stepped in front of her, heart pounding. "It's not safe." "And the boys?" Her gaze went cold. I said, "Let me see it." Suddenly, her voice layered with an odd static. My blood froze. "You're not Linda," I breathed. A grin twisted across her lips, a grin too wide to be hers. "What's wrong, darling? Don't you recognize me?" Her eyes flicked from the tanker to me. "You'd do anything for your family, wouldn't you?" "Let me near it. Get away," I hissed. She lunged, face contorting with an almost feral anger. "You left us, Thomas," she shrieked. "You left us to die." Her voice warbled between Linda's sweet timbre and a guttural growl. It was a mimicry, a puppet. Something wearing Linda's face to break me. Preston moved to intercept. She bashed him aside with inhuman strength, sending him sprawling on the wet pier. The shape advanced on me again, eyes glinting with that black, oily shine. "You owe me everything, Thomas," it hissed. Let me destroy your precious chemical. I raised the crowbar, tears burning my eyes. You're not my wife, I choked out. You're a monster, she cackled, a sound that made my ears ring. Well, I'm both. The fog touches every memory, every fear. Your Linda is in here somewhere, drowned in her own insecurities. If you kill me, you kill her too. Can you live with that? My grip faltered and my mind reeled. Could that be true? Had the real Linda been overtaken by the entity, or was this an illusion? I blinked away tears. You're lying, I whispered. She's still alive, I know it. You don't know anything, it snarled. You're just a coward. You'll fail again. Let me break that tanker. Let me ensure your regrets finally consume you. In desperation, I swung the crowbar, smashing her shoulder. She staggered, letting out a banshee wail. Then she turned and sprinted toward the tanker valve. I chased her, heart racing, fear warring with fury. Stop. She reached the control panel, flipping open a metal hatch. Her hand shot toward the emergency release lever that would dump the chemical onto the pier, wasted. With a cry, I grabbed her arm. We struggled, her strength uncanny. My muscles screamed. Preston appeared behind her, hooking his arm around her neck. She screeched. In the confusion, her face flickered, like a veil of illusions ripping away. For an instant, I saw a twisted, pale form with hollow eyes. Then Linda's image reappeared, contorted in rage. I mustered every ounce of will. You're not Linda, I repeated, forcing my conviction. With a final surge, I bashed her hand away from the lever. She reeled, losing balance on the slick pier. She spun toward me, eyes full of hate. We'll devour them all, she hissed. You'll watch your precious family drown in. She never finished. Another wave crashed, rocking the pier. She slipped as Preston and I lunged, but it was too late. Her body tumbled off the edge, plunging into the black water. I cried out, dropping to my knees to look for any sign of her. But the waves swallowed her. My heart shattered. If that was Linda, oh God. Preston gripped my shoulder, panting. That thing wasn't your wife, he gasped. It was simply a trick. My thoughts spun, hopelessness threatening to consume me. But if there's even a chance she was, he knelt beside me. She'd never sabotage our one shot. Thomas, it was a monster playing your guilt. I shut my eyes, tears mixing with the rain. The generator on the tanker hummed. The greenish chemical still poured into the bay. A swirling foam formed on the water's surface. In the distance, the rig's lights flickered ominously. We have to finish this, Preston urged, voice trembling. Then we find the real Linda and your sons. We don't stop now. I nodded, though every cell in my body felt numb. Right, I mumbled, rising shakily. We're almost done. Within 20 minutes, the tanker was empty. We'd poured every last drop of T7 solution into the bay. The surface shimmered with unnatural hues, like gasoline in a puddle. The storm raged overhead, lightning revealing monstrous silhouettes of rig equipment in the distance. Part of me prayed we were in time to save everyone. Part of me feared we'd only angered the entity further. Preston turned off the valve. Now what? He asked. I forced away thoughts of Linda's counterfeit, doppelganger. We wait, I said, voice raw. If the chemical kills the spore, maybe the fog lifts, maybe people return to normal. We'll check the town for my family. All we can do is... A thunderous rumble cut me off. The entire pier shook, as if struck by a giant wave. I stumbled, nearly falling. Out in the bay, the water churned violently, an enormous vortex forming. My breath caught in my throat. Is it working, or is something else emerging? A hideous shriek reverberated, seeming to come from both beneath the waves and inside my skull. Preston clamped his hands over his ears, grimacing. I felt a surge of raw, psychic pain that hammered every regret, every doubt. The swirl of water glowed faintly green in patches, but at its center, something black rose, massive, shapeless. Out of the swirling darkness, multiple elongated limbs or tentacles emerged, thrashing the surface. A deep roar shook the night. The rig's floodlights flickered in frantic pulses. The silhouette of a monstrous form towered above the water. My rational mind refused to understand its geometry. Too many angles, too many pulsating ridges. Preston's face was pale. God, that's the source. It's huge. Terror paralyzed me. We dropped our chemical into the water, and now this monster had awakened fully. Did we kill it or just provoke it? Another psychic wave pounded my brain, forcing me to my knees. The entity's presence slithered through my thoughts, whispering, "You think your petty solutions matter." I fought to keep my identity, my hope. "Stay with me," I shouted to Preston. "Remember why we did this?" He nodded, tears streaming down his face as he pressed his palms to his temples. We watched as the monstrous shape writhed in the bay, partially illuminated by lightning. Streams of black fluid erupted, mixing with the T7-laced water. A howling wind whipped us. Then a change. The enormous limbs twitched spastically as though in pain. Steam or smoke rose from the mass. The roars shifted to something like an agonized wail. My heart leapt. The chemical is burning it. But with that wail came an intensification of the psychic onslaught. My own regrets blasted across my mind's eye. Linda weeping when I left. My kids shouting that I didn't care. The boss at the factory telling me I was worthless. I gasped, nearly blacking out. Next to me, Preston collapsed, moaning. I had to hold on. If it's dying, it's lashing out with everything it has. The world seemed to vibrate with negative energy, as if every sinful moment across Millbrook erupted at once. I bit my tongue, forcing myself upright, stumbling along the pier to Preston. I grabbed his shoulder. "Don't give in," I rasped. "We have to." A final scream from the bay. Then quiet. The swirling vortex slowed. The towering form slumped, dissolving into the black waves. Sparks flickered from the rig. Darkness reclaimed the sea, punctuated only by faint arcs of lightning. The presence in my head receded, like a wave pulling back. Breathing hard, I stared at the water. It was still now, eerily so. A choking sob escaped me, half relief, half terror. "It's gone," Preston, trembling, murmured. "Maybe, just maybe, we might have killed it." I nodded slowly, tears blurring my vision. We did it. But I also remembered the monster wearing Linda's face, and my heart twisted. I still haven't found them. We clung to each other as the storm raged. The chemical swirl dissipated, carried out by the tide. In the distance, faint lights began flickering throughout the town. The backup grids or normal power returning, maybe. A strange hush fell over the pier. Even the fog seemed thinner. And yet, I couldn't help but feel that something was still horribly off. At dawn, pale sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Preston and I stumbled back to the tanker truck, exhausted, soaked, hearts hammered flat by adrenaline. The few silhouettes we saw on the streets no longer advanced with aggression. Some fell to their knees, weeping. Others wandered aimlessly, as if emerging from a nightmare. We wanted to see if the sedation of the spore had truly lifted the madness. My mind still reeled. The monster had been so massive, so impossibly real. We used the chemical, it collapsed. Shouldn't I feel more triumphant? Instead, emptiness gnawed at me. Where's Linda? Where are the boys? The entity's illusions had stolen that moment of joy, twisting it into horror. Preston and I split up. He wanted to check on his mother, who lived near the eastern edge of town. I wanted to see if my family had returned home. He offered to come with me, but I insisted he care for his own. We arranged to meet later at the old library, if all went well. The drive back to my neighborhood was surreal, with broken windows, toppled trash cans, and cars askew. Yet some neighbors stepped outside for the first time, blinking in the patchy sunlight. A few called to me or stared. Some apologized tearfully, swearing they remembered almost nothing, only a haze of bitterness. I saw more black residue on the sidewalks, congealing in puddles. My stomach churned at the memory of that man on the beach. The residue seemed to be drying, flaking away. A sign, perhaps, that the spore was dying off. We did it, I told myself again. I really saved them. But then the memory of Linda's drowning shape in the pier waters hammered me again. Was that truly her or a shapeshifter? Pulling into my driveway, I jumped out, calling, "Linda, Joey, Marcus." A hysterical urge had me flinging open the door, racing through the house, bedroom to bedroom. I checked the mailbox. Inside, a single note scrawled on an envelope. "Dad, we're safe, going with Mom to the rec center. Marcus needs a bandage. Please come." Joey. Relief and anxiety collided in me. They were alive, or at least they had been. They'd gone to the rec center. I remembered Linda sometimes volunteered there. Maybe that's where they ended up. But the rec center was exactly the place I'd wanted to avoid last night. Rumors said it was overrun with panic and aggression. Maybe that changed after the entity fell. Renewed hope kindled in my chest. I set off immediately. The Millbrook Recreation Center, a squat, brick building near the middle school, had been used as an emergency shelter in storms past. I half expected to see people outside, celebrating deliverance. Instead, the lot was mostly empty. Just a few cars, some with shattered windows. My heart hammered. Inside, long halls led to a gymnasium, a cafeteria. I heard faint voices echoing. Adrenaline spiked. My family's here somewhere. I tried calling out, "Linda, Joey, Marcus." My voice reverberated, but no immediate reply. I passed rows of cots along the corridor, evidence that many had sheltered here. Where were they now? At the end of the hall, double doors opened into the gym. I heard a shuffle of footsteps, quiet conversation. I entered, seeing about a dozen people milling around, some bandaged, others comforting each other. A few turned to stare. A hush fell. Then one of them shouted, "Thomas Reynolds," a man in a blood-stained jacket named Alfred, I recalled, who coached Marcus's soccer team. He approached, his eyes twitching. "You did this, you ended the madness," I swallowed. I helped create a chemical that might have killed the creature in the bay. The fog should be fading, a scattered murmur of relief. Some sank to their knees, weeping, muttering thanks. Alfred nodded, tears in his eyes. They were about to tear each other apart in here last night. But then, an hour or two ago, it was like a switch flipped. The anger lifted, and people started remembering themselves. I scanned the group. "Where is my wife, and where are my sons?" A woman pointed me toward a side room. They carried a boy in there earlier. He was injured, my heart soared. I dashed to the door. Inside, a single fluorescent bulb illuminated a makeshift infirmary. An older nurse was tending to a teenage boy on a cot. Another figure with long dark hair stood nearby. My throat closed up. "Linda." She turned, eyes filling with tears as soon as she recognized me. My composure broke. I raced to her, pulling her into a trembling hug. Unlike the monster's embrace on the pier, this was warm, real, heartbreakingly human. She sobbed into my chest. "Tom, oh God, I thought you'd never come." "Are you okay?" "I'm here," I whispered, my own tears escaping. "I'm so sorry I left." "I'm so sorry." Joey lay on the cot, pale but conscious. Marcus knelt beside him, offering comfort. They both looked up with wide, relieved eyes. My sons. They were safe. I cupped their faces, scanning for serious wounds. "You're okay." "Joey, your leg," he grimaced. "I twisted it when we ran from those things." "It's just a bad sprain." I brushed back his hair, blinking away tears. Marcus clung to my hand. I can't believe you're here, Dad." Linda's face was a picture of relief mixed with heartbreak. "After all this, we're alive." She squeezed my hand, no anger in her eyes, only gratitude. I heard rumors someone poured a chemical into the bay. "Was that you?" I nodded, voice tight. "With Preston's help. We think it destroyed the entity." Her lips trembled. "So it's over," I paused. The final shriek of the monster echoed in my mind. I think so," I said quietly. "The fog is receding. People are coming back to themselves. We really should be safe." She sagged against me, tears of relief. The nurse quietly stepped aside to give us a moment. My chest felt ready to burst with love and guilt. For a few minutes, we just held each other, letting the horror wash away. I found them. I didn't fail this time. In the day's bright light, it was almost possible to believe it had all been a mass hallucination. But we knew better. I still hadn't seen Preston. We'd agreed to meet at the library if all went well, but maybe he got sidetracked helping others. I told myself I'd find him tomorrow. Night fell on a battered but hopeful town. Linda and I tucked the boys in, something I hadn't done in years. They clung to me, and I felt more certain than ever that I'd do anything to protect them. Even if I had once wasted potential, maybe I'd redeemed some of it now. Finally, with a weary sigh, Linda and I crawled into bed. She stroked my hair, voice soft. "We'll rebuild thing together this time." I closed my eyes, the weight of exhaustion pulling me under. Yet in the stillness, I thought I heard a gentle hum, like the hush of waves on the shore. Clearly, the corners of my mind still vibrated with half-formed anxieties. Then, sometime past midnight, I startled awake. The house was silent, Linda asleep beside me, the kids in their rooms. The clock read 2:14 a.m., and my pulse hammered for no reason I could name. The deep quiet pressed in, stoking my old anxiety. We're safe now, and the entity is gone. Then I heard it, a faint whisper from downstairs. Hard in my throat, I slipped out of bed, not wanting to wake Linda. I crept down the hall, every nerve on edge. The front door was closed, locked. The living room dimly lit by a single street lamp glow. Everything seemed normal. But the whisper came again, this time whispering my name. A chill washed over me. It sounded like Linda's voice, but she was clearly upstairs, asleep. I followed the sound to the kitchen, my eyes scanning the darkness. And then, from the corner, something moved. I flipped the light switch, breath hitching. For a split second, I saw a shape, like a half-formed silhouette of a woman, shimmering with that same black, oily sheen. It was ragged, intangible, as if a piece of the fog was lingering inside my house. Impossible, I thought. The entity was dead. She turned to face me, eyes hollow. My heart nearly stopped. It looked just like Linda's face but stretched, mouth parted in a silent scream. The overhead light flickered, and for an instant, I thought I saw the entire figure glitch, like a bad TV signal. Then it vanished, leaving the kitchen empty. I stood there, heart pounding so loud I felt my head would explode. Did I hallucinate? Did leftover spores remain inside these walls? Somewhere above me, the floor creaked, Linda shifting in bed, or maybe one of the boys. But that shape, fear knotted my stomach. Is it truly over, or is something else left behind? Then, in the hallway mirror, my reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, and for a moment, I thought I saw the black fungus creeping around my pupils. Panicked, I blinked and it was gone. Was it just my imagination, or just a warning? I closed my bedroom door. The whispers in my head had mostly quieted, but one phrase remained, repeating in that same static-laced voice. It's not over. It's never over. That's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed the video, subscribing to my channel would help me out more than you can imagine. I appreciate you, and I'll see you soon.